So we'll turn it over to Ron and we'll take our trip to Senegal.
Okay, well, good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Thanks again to CCO for the invitation and Bob for the introduction. As was mentioned, I haven't been overly active in the past few decades, and so my presentation and my vocabulary probably won't be, quite, too technical. But anyways, so be it. And as Bob mentioned, I arrived in Senegal in 2016. My wife is with Global Affairs Canada, and she was posted there, and the timing worked out well because I could take my retirement and finally, focus a little bit more on ham radio. The presentation today, I had a little bit of problems with the actual presentation itself. I have to unfortunately kind of scroll the deck itself, the slides. So bear with me with that. My apologies again. So anyway, so let's get on. So operating and contesting in Senegal. Just give me one moment. I just want to double check the presentation here. Just give me one sec. Okay, I think, Ron, do you have the presentation, the last one handy? Because I seem to be getting the older one. Okay, are you there, Ron? Hello?
I can hear you okay, Ron, but perhaps Ron was doing something.
Okay, all right. Well, anyways, let me just carry on then with this slide.
Try going into okay, so you've got slideshow mode.
Yeah, it was actually a different version here, but anyways, so be it. I'll work with that. It's won't make any big difference. Okay, so anyways, yeah. So as I said, we arrived in 2016, and so what I would like to discuss is first my experience applying for a license in Senegal. Then I'll talk briefly about the construction of the station.
By the way, I'm back. I just had a computer problem here.
It's no problem, Ron. I think I'll just work with the this deck here that I have open.
Okay.
Yeah. So then I'll talk about getting on the air itself, and then a little bit about contesting. And Dave VE3KG will sort of come in at the end of my presentation to talk a little bit more about his contest experience when he came to Senegal, and he'll probably give you a lot more kind of better insights into the actual contesting environment from there. And then I'll just very briefly touch on some of the awards that I received while I was in Senegal for a total of 3 years. So applying for a license. What was quite interesting was that my concern, moving to Senegal and applying for a license there, was that I would possibly have to write an exam in French, which, although I do speak French, looking at a technical exam would have been pretty challenging, I think, for me. So what was quite interesting is that in discussions with Richard Furch, VE3KI, we discovered that there was a reciprocal agreement between Canada and Senegal, which was essentially just a letter that was signed back, I think, in 1967, when a Senegalese officer, I'm not sure if it was a military officer or not, was coming to Canada and who had a license, a Senegalese license, and they essentially asked for a reciprocal agreement. And so lo and behold, that's basically what exists since 1967. So I was able to use that in my application. to demonstrate that I didn't have to write an exam in Senegal, which was a relief. So the process, I found out that the appropriate ministry in Dakar was the Autorité de Régulation des Télécommunications et des Postes. So I contacted the office, and there was a form, an online form that I had to fill out. And so I duly filled it out and had to pay some nominal, price. It was probably like $20 Canadian, whatever. And so I went to the office there, to that ministry, and deposited my application. And at that time, I asked the gentleman. I said, "Well, how long will this take?" And he said, "Well, it should be about maybe 2 weeks to get my call sign." So that was great. So I left, and so after about 3 weeks, I still hadn't heard anything. So I contacted the gentleman and sort of asked him, like, "Well, it's been 3 weeks, what's happening?" And he goes, "Oh, yes, we're working on it, it'll be another week." Fine. So then I waited, another week or 10 days, and still didn't hear anything. So I called the same gentleman back, and he said, "Well, there's a lot of applications, in the in basket, which kind of surprised me because there's not too many people operating from Senegal." So then he said, "Well, could I come over to see you?" Which is quite quite odd. And I sort of had an inkling as to why he wanted to come and visit me at my apartment. So lo and behold, this special visit, the gentleman showed up, very polite, and I invited him to sit down, and he started to say that, "Oh yes, well, there's a lot of applications, and if you really want your file to move up to the top of the bin, perhaps a little extra money will suffice." So anyway, so I basically told him that it wasn't appropriate, especially being a Canadian diplomat in Senegal, and I reminded him that the new president was really pushing against corruption in the government and whatnot. So anyways, at that point, he kind of stood up and thanked me for my time, and then he left. And then about half an hour later, the phone rings, and I didn't know too many people in Senegal at that point, so I had kind of an idea of who was calling. So yes, lo and behold, it was the same gentleman, and he says, "Oh well, you can come to the office. Your license is ready." Okay, so anyway, so I went and picked it up, and interestingly, the letter that was signed by his boss was actually signed about 3 days before he came by to visit me. So anyway, so that was kind of an interesting introduction into Senegal and some of the bureaucracy there that exists. So anyway, so that was kind of the experience in getting the application for the license completed, and then after that, the next step was really to start looking at constructing the station. So the apartment itself was a 10-story apartment with a flat roof, and we were on the 8th floor. So I started to look at the possibility of constructing, a tower up on the roof of the building. So for the approval, I initially contacted the embassy and tried to get some indications, through the officer there who was responsible for leasing the apartment to get the approval. And they didn't really know what I wanted. And then I also contacted the real estate agent for the building owner, and they asked a few questions and didn't really kind of know what I wanted to do and what amateur radio was all about. So anyway, so I kind of basically decided that I would just go ahead and do it, and if someone told me to stop, then I would stop, obviously. So the design itself was interesting. I first had to find some basic accessories, like clamps and bolts and whatnot, and also to construct a concrete pad to attach the tower section. So in Dakar, you have to realize that there's no real stores like Home Depot or Canadian Tire. It's all basically these little shops and and markets that are quite tiny and very hard to find what you're looking for. So anyway, so I went around and shopped for some different parts and that, and I'll get to a photo in a moment to show you. And then the other thing I needed to do was, of course, to design the station and the tower. So I was able to find a contractor who would essentially pour my concrete base and also fabricate essentially a metal frame to attach the base of the tower section. So I will go actually to a picture. So hopefully you can sort of make out this. So this is Sandaga Market in downtown Dakar. And as you can see in the foreground, these are all basically little corrugated, sheet metal, huts, and each stall is maybe 2 meters wide and 2 meters deep. So I was looking for some specific bolts. So I finally found one little shop, and I said, "Do you have these bolts?" And he goes, "Yes, yes, no problem." So he gave me exactly what I was looking for. I said, "Oh, this is great." And I go, "I'm also looking, for some clamps." He goes, "Well, I don't sell clamps. You'll have to go down, to the next stall, a few doors down, to get some clamps." So basically, each little stall only sold one thing. It was either nails or screws or washers or whatever. So, anyways, it took quite a while to get all of the equipment that I needed. But anyways, finally I was able to piece together everything that I needed. So then this was the base. So again, I hired a contractor who actually was quite competent and quite efficient. And as you can see, he poured this concrete base right on top of the roof of the building, and also fabricated the metal frame or metal plate that was sunk right into the concrete, which I could attach the 3 legs of the tower. So that actually worked out quite well. It only took him about a week to get everything fabricated. Then the next thing that was a little bit of a challenge here, and of course you can see the tower there on the left hand side of the picture, was this part of the building that I call the bunker. And the lower part, the white part, was essentially the elevator mechanical room, and above that, this huge concrete structure was essentially the water reservoir for the building. So that became quite a challenge in trying to place the base of the tower on the roof to obviously avoid rotating the antenna into the bunker. But it also did create quite a bit of a challenge if I turned the antenna to an eastern heading, because basically I was pointing right at this concrete structure. The other thing as well, the lower, that's the MA5B, the 3-element Yagi at the top there. Below that is a 6-element, 6-meter antenna, which was donated to me by actually a French ham who was living there. And so when I installed the 6-meter antenna and tried to rotate it, I realized that one of the elements, the 6th element, basically was hitting this bunker. So I had to actually remove one of the elements. So the 6th element suddenly became the 5-element 6-meter antenna. So anyways, yeah, so that was one of the challenges in constructing the tower and trying to avoid this bunker here that obviously I couldn't move. So yeah, so then the next slide is getting on the air. And as I mentioned, I really did not have very much experience at all, and certainly not any experience in dealing with pilots. So again, with sweaty palms and trembling fingers, I fired up the station, and of course, I think Dave had kind of warned me that I would be probably fairly popular, because essentially I was really the only operator, working, in Senegal at that time. And so when I did get on the air, I was just met with, amazing pilots. I was having difficulties making out, call signs and whatnot. So it was actually, fairly intimidating, I have to admit, the first, a few times. So managing the contacts, as many of you, know better than I, there are certain techniques, to managing contacts. And one of them that, was using the prefix of 1, 2, 3, 4, and so calling out for anyone with only a prefix with number 1, to come back, and so that of course helped to start to reduce the number of people piling on, and it made it a little bit easier to manage these pileups, which were just quite incredible. But one sort of anecdotal point was that I did this prefix management by starting with anyone with prefix number 1, and then number 2, and all the way up to number 9, and then finally, like after managing this for about an hour and a half, I was kind of just exhausted. So I decided to to shut down. And after I did that, I heard actually, I would still recall this Whiskey Zero Romeo India Charlie from Arizona. I heard him saying, after I had kind of turned off, he says, "Well, what about zeros?" He goes, "Isn't zero a number?" And of course, I completely sort of forgot that call signs also start with the number 0 as a prefix. So anyways, lesson learned. So the next time I got on the air, then I actually started with the prefix 0, just to make sure that I didn't forget that. So anyway, so again, the pilots were really intimidating, and it took me a few tries to get comfortable with it, and to finally start to be able to better manage and deal with the traffic and that. So anyway, so that was again quite an interesting experience for me. The QSL card. One thing that I did want to do, because I knew that I would be fairly rare, operating out of Senegal. I did want to have a QSL card that was kind of unique and really kind of represented the country as well. So the first couple of weeks, if not a couple of months, I kept looking around for like a really perfect picture, that I could use for the QSL card. And what happened was I went to like an arts and craft sale before Christmas that was put on in Dakar. And while I was there, I actually saw a woman who was a professional photographer, and she had photos on display. And so I saw one that was really quite really caught my attention, and I asked her if she would allow me to use for free her photograph, and I said that I would give credit on the QSL card with her name and whatnot, and so she agreed, and that's what I did. So in the end, I did come up with this QSL card, and to me it really kind of captured the essence of Senegal. This little boy kind of looking out to his future, and sitting on the pirogue, boats, which are the very classical, fishing boats that are used in Senegal. So anyway, so I was really quite, pleased with the how it turned out, and I was, kind of proud that I was able to kind of, give people who would receive the QSL card, kind of this image of what Senegal is really all about. So anyway, so that was kind of a really nice, I think, experience that I had. Searching for a QSL card. So onto the contesting, and again, Dave will I think give a much better kind of clarity and insight into the contesting experience there. Just very briefly, location again, Dakar, which is the westernmost point of Africa, just below Mauritania, which is just below Morocco. So we were located, the building itself, our apartment building was literally 200 meters from the ocean, basically looking, westwards. So a very good, I think, location, for the antenna. And the conditions, back in 2016, at that time, I guess the conditions weren't really that good. Propagation wasn't that great. And again, Dave can probably, talk a little bit more about that. I had more difficulties, I found, with again with this bunker, being on the east side of making any kind of contacts, east of my location. But I was able to obviously make contacts into Europe, North America, and somewhat into South America as well. My experience with the contesting itself, there was kind of a sweet spot for me. Again, with my station being fairly modest, and it was kind of hard to break into Europe and North America, for many of the contests. But there was this point in time around dinner time, maybe 6, 7 p.m. in the evening, where the band, especially on 20 meters, the band got just totally quiet. Like there was absolutely no noise. And suddenly I would just open up into South America, and was able to make, quite a few contacts into South America, into the Caribbean. And so, for me, for the contesting, I kind of didn't, push myself too hard during the daytime, because it was just so hard, to break into the other regions. But I just waited for this kind of sweet spot. Then I was able to make, quite a few contacts. So that was really, quite, quite an interesting observation, at that time. The nice visit I will get to in a moment. So the next slide is again just a brief kind of overview of some of the different contests that I participated in. And amazingly, I always came out #1 in Senegal, which of course I was probably the only person in Senegal operating. So that was almost a foregone conclusion. Although I did, do well in some of the other, contests. Like for example, in the second one, 2017 ARRL 10 meter, I was #9 outside of North America. So that was, quite a decent, score. Anyways, as I said, being in Senegal was quite unique. One interesting point was often when I would be contacting or making QSOs in a contest, a lot of people, for some reason, would only hear Whiskey 1 SU. So they thought I was an American, and so I would have to correct them 3, 4 times before they finally clued into it was actually 6 Whiskey 1 SU, which is a double multiplier. So suddenly people were quite pleased to find out that they were actually contacting Senegal at the time. So anyway, so that was kind of my experience overall. So again, we were there for 3 years. I was quite sad to have to dismantle the station in the summer of 2019, especially knowing that we were being cross-posted to Paris, which of course Paris being Paris was quite nice, but knowing that I wouldn't be able to get any kind of antenna up in downtown Paris. So a little bit of a sad moment there for me having been a fairly popular contact for 3 years, to suddenly going to virtually nothing in Paris. So, but anyway, so that's I think my presentation. I know it's probably a little quicker than what maybe was expected, but I wanted to save some time as well for Dave to share his insights and experience coming over to work under 6 Whiskey 1 SU as well. So anyway, I think that's the end of my presentation. So the nice visit, as opposed to the special visit, I'll pass it over to Dave. Are you there, Dave?
I am here, Ron. And I wonder if Ron, could you please, the other Ron, could you please make me a co-host so I can screen share?
Okay, or Bob will do it.
Hello, Bob.
There you are, Dave.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So just give me a moment here. All right. So I call this my itty bitty African contest adventure. My one and only time ever visiting Africa, and I had a chance to operate a contest, so it was all part of the plan. Oh, hang on a second now. I hit the wrong button. So one more time. Okay. There you go. You should all be seeing that now. All right. So so during Ron's posting there, I managed to arrange I wanted to go visit Ron. I wanted to go see where he lived. I wanted to get on the air from his place, of course. I wanted to see a little bit of Africa, a place I'd never been to before. So I arranged my trip to Ron for November 2017, where part of the plan was to take in the 2017 CQ Worldwide CW contest. So okay, Ron and I have known each other for a long time. We were both teenagers when we met and when I introduced him to ham radio. I'd never been to Africa, so Ron and Monica's posting to Dakar was a wonderful opportunity to go there and to at least see one little part of that continent. And of course, one of the attractions was also that Ron had a ready-made station already built, ready to go, so I could simply show up and start operating, and it was great fun. So again, I planned for November of 2017 to be there for the CQ Worldwide CW. Now, at the time I was living in Fredericton, you may be surprised to learn that there is no direct flight between Fredericton and Dakar. So I had to go through the jigs and reels of going through Montreal, Brussels, and Dakar to get there. But you know, a day of travel, and Ron and Monica met me at the airport. So before the contest, I did a little bit of CW operating. I did a lot of tourism. Took a walk through the Sandager market with Ron. It was quite a feast for the senses, and reminded me a lot of the time I lived in Beijing for a couple of years and traveled a bit in Asia, and so it reminded me a lot of that. I also, before the contest, did a little bit of station reorganization. Ron had the station set up one way for him. I adapted it for my purposes for the contest, so getting N1MM plus set up properly, setting up my keyword interface, dealing with an RFI problem on 80 meters. Of course, being on the 8th floor of a 10-story apartment building, Ron really doesn't have ground, and consequently, sometimes you get stray RF showing up in places it shouldn't. When you're running a little bit more power, that can have a big impact on things like keyers, on any kind of accessory equipment. So trying to sort this problem out was a bit of a challenge. I really wanted to get on 80 meters as much as I could, and artificial ground seemed to be the solution. And for a little while, an artificial ground seemed to work fairly well. But again, you're up on the 8th story of a 10-story apartment building, so there are limitations on what you can practically do. So when it finally came to the contest, I had a pretty simple strategy. I realized I was dealing with a fairly basic station, you know, a very small tri-bander, some dipoles for 80 and 40 meters. I knew I wasn't going to make a rollicking score. So I had a simple strategy to run as much as I could. I set myself a relatively modest target of 3,000 QSOs. I thought that would be easily achieved. And I saw this as an opportunity to learn a bit about what propagation was like from that part of the world. And I sort of followed through with that. Now, one of the things about Dakar, I mean, it's one thing to be in West Africa, but Dakar is a pretty special place from a radio point of view. We're on the west coast of Africa. We're on the North Atlantic. You know, Europe is to the north. North America is to the northwest. You know, these are two centers of population of amateur radio that are tremendous wells for making lots of QSOs. So not that far away, but most of the time they have their beams pointed at each other. So here we are at, say, the rim of the North Atlantic. We're not too far from where D4 is, not too far from the Cape Verde Islands. And in fact, Dakar itself is on the Cape, is on Cape Verde, is on the Green Cape, the cape that reaches out into the Atlantic. So the city of Dakar is on this narrow peninsula. So really in just about every direction, you're looking over salt water. And Ron's apartment was actually quite close to salt water, looking towards the north and the west. You know, from the roof of his apartment buildings, you're looking at the wide open Atlantic Ocean. So this really is it's a very good spot to be from a propagation point of view. If you have to be anywhere, why not be out on a peninsula sticking out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean? So the contest began, of course, at midnight GMT, which is also midnight local time. They're on GMT locally. And the contest started on 20 meters. You often start on 20 meters. And I thought I had a really good run going for 12 minutes. And all of a sudden my run died. I lost my frequency. I then tried making search and bounce QSOs. I couldn't understand this because signals I was hearing, you know, from Europe, from North America, they were all nice and loud, easy to work, should have been easy to work, but my run died. So I immediately went into troubleshooting mode, trying to figure out what the problem was, and I narrowed it down to the remote coax switch. Now, this was after midnight. Ron had already gone to bed, and here I was with basically a defunct station and this fantastic contest on the go. It was really, it was a bit of a conundrum here. Anyway, what I did for the next several, I didn't want to wake Ron up. I wanted to be a good guest. So I spent the next 4.5 hours searching and pouncing, trying to make QSOs. And it was a struggle to make 39 QSOs on 20 and 40 meters. And finally, I gave up about 0500 and went to bed. About 0900, Ron gets up and we sorted out a solution. And basically, it means bypassing the remote coax switch. So the remote coax switch is up on the roof. And the roof, Ron doesn't have a key for access. He has to get it from the security guards downstairs. So anytime I wanted to change from one antenna, that is the big tribander, to the dipoles, I would have to go through this elaborate dance to get the key. I'd have to take the elevator down to the lobby, talk to the nice security guard, get the key, go back upstairs, do my jiggery pokery with the coaxial cables, and then go back downstairs, return the key, and then go back up. So if I wanted to make a band change, like go from the high bands to 40 meters, it took about a half an hour. It wasn't simply flipping a switch. So that put me in a position where I had to make a hard decision. I'm either going to stay in the high bands or I'm going to stay on 40 meters. And that's what I did. I basically worked out the high bands until I couldn't work it anymore, and then had to switch to 40 meters and had to go through this elaborate dance with the security guard downstairs. So that was one big limitation on the operation. Notwithstanding the loss of several hours at the beginning, I managed to get in 42 hours of the 48. And of course, at the end, it was a train wreck, like we normally are at the end of a contest. One of the things that I found kind of fun, oh yes, I made one QSO on 80 meters and one alone. That 80 meter dipole, for whatever reason, didn't seem to be functioning. And so I worked an EA8, which is pretty much my closest neighbor, and then gave up on 80 meters entirely. So it was all about making QSOs as far as I was concerned. So I readily made that 3,000 QSO target in spite of the problems. I lost about 40 QSOs and a couple of mults to my own mislogging, but I found more entertaining how many times I was mislogged as something else. So Ron mentioned that he was frequently mistaken for W1SU. On CW, that happened a lot to me. I was also frequently mistaken for BW1SU. So a lot of people lost QSOs with me because they mislogged my call sign, but of course I didn't lose QSOs with them. Ultimately, the result was pretty good. Ended up with a score of about 3.5 million. After score correction, about 3,400 QSOs, and I believe, let's see, now I wasn't first in Africa, but let's see, I think I have that somewhere on a future screen. So I took my log and I put it through a utility online that lets you map out your logs for for what you've worked. So we were at the bottom of the sunspot cycle. 10 meters wasn't particularly good, but I had good enough openings to Europe, North America, South America, the Caribbean. Only made a modest number of QSOs on that band. 15 meters was really the big band, 1,400 QSOs. But you'll notice on neither 10 nor 15 did I work any Japanese. Now, the bunker is a bit of an issue. Ron mentioned the great big water tank and the elevator shaft that's at the top of the building. That blocks you from the Middle East. It blocks you from most of Africa, but it doesn't block the northern paths at all. So you're wide open to Europe. And Japan really is pretty much over the pole from there, or maybe at about roughly the same bearing as Europe. So no Japanese worked on 10 or 15 at all. I was a little surprised at that. 20 and 40 were a little bit better for working Japanese, so I worked a few. 40 meters is actually pretty good for them. But you can see the bulk of the QSOs were Europe and North America, as you would expect. And that big well of Japanese stations simply wasn't available to me. So I ended up the contest. I went in the single op all bands high power category, unassisted. Ended up number 3 in Africa, well behind the leader, who was CR300. Came away with a nice certificate, nice memories, an excellent experience, and a great visit with Ron, who, in addition to being able to operate from his station, he was an excellent tour guide. So we had all sorts of interesting adventures in Senegal, mostly in Dakar, but a little bit outside the city. So if anybody has any questions, comments, I'd be pleased to hear them.
Thanks, Dave. That's great. There was a question about which both of us on, but it was the CW contest, I believe.
Yes. November, the CW contest, CQ Worldwide CW.
Yep. So if anybody else has any questions for Dave, you can always just unmute your mic and go ahead.
Is there any concern about personal safety in Senegal?